The year was 1535, and a thick morning mist clung to the Thames as London stirred to witness yet another sombre spectacle. On this day, one of England's sharpest intellects would lay his neck upon the executioner's block, his only offence, refusing to bend his conscience to a king's command. Thomas More, once Henry VIII's most trusted counsellor, would learn that faithfulness to God could cost him everything, even his head. His tale is far more than political drama. It stands as a stark warning of how swiftly royal favor can sour into rage, and how the firmest principles so often invite the cruelest fates. In the opening decades of the 16th century, England hovered between the old medieval world and the bright promise of the Renaissance. Henry VIII had taken the throne as a golden young king, admired for his learning, his athletic prowess, and his apparent devotion to the Catholic faith. The realm flourished in wealth and culture, with humanist scholars like Thomas More carrying classical wisdom into the royal circle. More himself seemed the living emblem of this hopeful era. A dazzling lawyer, philosopher, and the author of Utopia, he had climbed from merchant stock roots to become Lord Chancellor, the highest judicial office in the kingdom. Yet beneath the brilliant surface, a tempest was gathering that would rip England apart and swallow its finest minds. The storm began with a problem as ancient as kingship itself: succession. Catherine of Aragon, Henry's queen for almost 20 years, had borne only one surviving child, a daughter, Mary. By 1527 Henry had persuaded himself that God had cursed the marriage, pointing to scripture that appeared to forbid marrying a deceased brother's widow. Catherine had, indeed, been briefly wed to Henry's late brother Arthur. What began as pious doubt swiftly hardened into obsession the moment Henry met Anne Boleyn, a magnetic young woman who would accept nothing less than the crown itself. To make her queen demanded an annulment from Rome, something Pope Clement VII dared not grant, while Catherine's nephew, Emperor Charles V, held half of Italy in his grip. When the papacy refused to yield, Henry took a road that would forever alter England's destiny. In 1534 Parliament passed the Act of Supremacy, proclaiming the king sole supreme head of the Church of England. The break with Rome now let Henry annul his own marriage and marry Anne Boleyn, but it also required every subject to swear an oath acknowledging the new order. For most courtiers, this was merely another bend in the road of survival. Conscience had always been flexible when power demanded it. But for Thomas More, whose faith ran deeper than ambition, the oath posed an impossible dilemma: earthly preferment or eternal salvation. He had already stepped down as Lord Chancellor in 1532, pleading ill health, though everyone knew the true cause of his retreat. More's refusal to swear was not theatrical, it was quiet, unshakable resolve. Called before commissioners, he refused to give reasons, aware that silence might spare his life while speech would condemn him. By law, silence was not treason. Henry's mounting paranoia, however, had little patience for legal niceties. The king who once called More a man for all seasons, now saw in him a living rebuke to royal supremacy. In April 1534 More was arrested and carried to the Tower of London, that forbidding fortress where so many of Henry's foes had breathed their last. The charge was shadowy yet deadly, maliciously depriving the king of his rightful title as head of the church. The Tower had loomed over the Thames for almost 5 centuries, its massive walls hiding England's darkest secrets. More was locked in the Bell Tower, a round stone room that had lately held other notable prisoners. Despite his rank, no comforts were allowed. The cell was dank and cold, containing only a straw pallet and a rough table. His family was occasionally permitted to visit, but those glimpses only underscored his decline. His beloved daughter Margaret later wrote of how his once sturdy body had wasted away, his cheeks hollow from meager rations and ceaseless anxiety. Yet visitors marveled that his spirit stayed remarkably buoyant, upheld by prayer and the certainty that he suffered for righteousness. Over the 15 months of his confinement, More's fate became a cause célèbre across Catholic Europe. Scholars, bishops, and princes who had long revered his writings watched in dismay as Henry readied himself to crush one of Christendom's brightest lights. The king remained unmoved by foreign pleas. He required either More's submission or his death to cement his grip on the English Church. Again and again royal agents came offering freedom for a single oath. Each time More refused, gently, courteously, but without wavering, explaining that he harbored no ill will toward those who had sworn, yet his own conscience forbade it. His stand rested not on politics but on theology. To accept Henry as supreme head would, he believed, imperil his immortal soul. In the days before his trial, Henry staged a final cruelty. He ordered the execution of John Fisher, the aged Bishop of Rochester and More's dear friend, condemned for the same refusal. Fisher's death was meant to shatter More's resolve. When news reached him in the Tower, More wept openly, understanding the king's unmistakable message: no eminence, no sanctity would shield defiance. On July 1, 1535, Thomas More was tried in Westminster Hall, the very chamber where he had once sat as Lord Chancellor. The outcome was preordained, stage-managed by Thomas Cromwell, Henry's ruthless minister who had masterminded the rupture with Rome. The case hinged on the word of Richard Rich, Solicitor General, who swore More had denied the king's supremacy in private conversation. More demolished the testimony, exposing Rich as a liar with every motive to perjure himself. In a flash of scalding eloquence, More declared he would not stake his soul on the word of such a man. Yet the judges had their instructions: law would not be allowed to frustrate the king. The verdict came down cold and swift: guilty of high treason, sentenced to be hanged, drawn, and quartered. Henry then commuted the penalty to simple beheading, a merciful concession to More's noble blood that spared him the full barbarity. More accepted the news with his usual calm, thanking the king for his gracious clemency in a tone that may have carried the faintest edge of irony. He was granted 5 days to set his soul in order. On the morning of July 6, 1535, Thomas More rose in his cell to greet his last sunrise. He had passed the night in prayer and letter-writing, bidding farewell to his family and making his peace with God. When the guards came, they found him serene, dressed in his best remaining garments as though attending a ceremony rather than his own death. The short walk across Tower Green to the scaffold took only minutes. His family had pleaded to be present, but Henry forbade it, perhaps fearing their sorrow would soften the crowd. Only trusted officials and Tower guards stood witness, men whose loyalty was beyond question. The scaffold was a plain wooden platform raised 4 feet for better viewing. At its center waited the oak block, polished smooth and darkened by generations of blood. The hooded executioner already stood ready, broad axe in hand. More climbed the steps steadily, though friends later said his legs shook from long confinement. Noticing the platform's rickety state, he turned to the lieutenant with his trademark wit: "I pray you, Master Lieutenant, see me safe up, and for my coming down, let me shift for myself." Given the customary chance to speak, More kept his words brief and measured. He declared himself the king's good servant, but God's first, forgave his executioner, asked the onlookers to pray for the king, and affirmed he died in and for the faith of the Holy Catholic Church. His voice never wavered. He knelt, laid his neck upon the block, and with a final light-hearted request that the executioner aim carefully, adjusted his beard aside, saying it at least had committed no treason. The axe rose, flashed once in the morning sun, and fell. A single clean stroke ended the life of England's most brilliant mind. Blood poured across the scaffold as the body gave one brief shudder and lay still. The head rolled a little before stopping, eyes glazing, yet the face strangely tranquil. Henry's vengeance was not finished. The head was parboiled and spiked on London Bridge among the other traitors, a deliberate horror meant to cow the city. For nearly a month thousands passed beneath the decaying features of the man who had once been their Lord Chancellor. Yet many who looked up felt not fear but awe at the dignity that death itself could not erase. Legend, perhaps truth, says Margaret More bribed the bridge-keeper, retrieved her father's head when it was taken down, and kept it as a relic until her own death. The body was buried unmarked within the Tower precincts, later reign-terrored at Canterbury. From knight and peer of the realm, celebrated across Europe as a giant of humanist learning, Thomas More was now officially a traitor, his name erased from royal records, his family left in disgrace. Shock rippled across Catholic Europe. Emperor Charles V is said to have remarked he would rather have lost his finest city than such a counselor. For centuries later, in 1935, Pope Pius XI would canonize More as a martyr and saint, vindication unimaginable in 1535. More's execution marked the moment Henry VIII crossed from Renaissance prince into tyrant, proving that neither past service nor towering intellect could shield a man from royal fury. The gentle dream of wedding classical reason to Christian virtue, the dream More had lived, died with him on that scaffold. His death foreshadowed generations of religious bloodshed in England, as Catholic and Protestant alike would suffer under rulers who demanded not just obedience but enthusiastic complicity. The author of Utopia learned that no perfect island exists for those who place conscience above survival. In an age when personal belief and political loyalty still collide, Thomas More's story cuts as deeply as ever. His refusal to trade integrity for life forces us to ask the hardest questions: what do we owe the state, what do we owe our soul, and what price are we truly willing to pay for truth? On a misty July morning in 1535, a single axe blow silenced one of history's greatest minds, yet in that silence Thomas More still speaks, urging us to count the cost of standing firm.